I am João Medeiros, curator of Wired Health and contributing editor at Wire. I am delighted to be kicking off today's event. And joining me first to open our first episode of Wired Health Tech is Özlem Türeci, the co-founder and chief medical officer of BioNTech. She's a physician, immunologist, cancer researcher, and most importantly, she has been leading the clinical development of BioNTech's Project Lightspeed, the company's successful effort to develop and distribute mRNA vaccine against COVID-19, an historic achievement completed in less than 1 year. Welcome, Dr. Türeci.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. Let me ask you first about one of the recent announcements. You're developing a malaria vaccine. Tell me, how can mRNA succeed with malaria when there have been so many other problems with existing ones?
mRNA has a couple of advantages. It's a very versatile technology, and a technology by which one can engineer very fast individual vaccine candidates which feature different antigens. And this is exactly what we want to leverage, namely to assess different immunogens and antigens of a malaria pathogen and test them with regard to the potency to induce immune responses. So this is one part which can be addressed by mRNA, but also the fast and rapid its capability to allow fast and rapid manufacturing and clinical testing.
And tell me, how is malaria different from COVID-19 as a challenge for you, in terms of developing the vaccine?
Yeah, malaria is a very complex pathogen. It is a protozoan, so it's a more complex structure, and it has been with the human population for a long time, which is very different to the coronavirus, which means that it has developed various ways to escape immune recognition and defense by the human organism. That means that in addition to bringing in mRNA as a vaccine technology, we have to combine this with immunological and biological deep domain understanding of the protozoan, the malaria protozoan itself, and also the understanding of the type of immune responses it can induce in humans.
What is the goal in terms of the efficacy of the vaccine?
We want to generate a vaccine which is as efficacious as possible, and in particular also in the younger population.
So tell me, you've partnered with African institutes to produce and test this new malaria vaccine. Also, you announced recently a deal to produce the COVID-19 vaccine in South Africa, if I'm not mistaken. Is this, in your view, a way to fight the vaccine disparities that we're seeing throughout the world?
Absolutely. We originally, many years ago, when we chose and optimized mRNA as a vaccine format, we did this because we saw the huge potential of mRNA technologies to democratize access to health. And the COVID pandemic had actually been something like a baptism by fire for this technology, because many stepping stones towards this potential of mRNA have been accelerated. For example, building and upscaling manufacturing, logistics, and so on. There are a couple of stepping stones which still need to be addressed, and our initiative to start to build also manufacturing capacities and also skills at those places where our vaccines should go and be used is one of those work streams to address disparities. We start with establishing single production steps in low and middle income countries, such as our cooperation with BioNTech in South Africa for our vaccines. But the long-term goal is to build dedicated end-to-end productions for an enduring long-term manufacturing solutions in those regions.
Also, you've recently published early results on experimental treatments in colon cancer, melanoma for mouse models at the moment. Cancer vaccines, of course, have been the focus of your research before the pandemic. Can you tell us more about the progress you've made since then?
Yes, we actually started our clinical programs with mRNA cancer vaccines many years ago. In 2012. And at the time point when we started our COVID-19 vaccine development, we had already treated several hundreds of patients with our cancer vaccines. And that was actually what we could build on when we started Project Lightspeed, the COVID-19 vaccine development. We are working with two types of cancer vaccines. One of these types are off-the-shelf cancer vaccines, which means that we identify antigens which are cancer specific for different cancer indications, and they are used to immunize patients with advanced cancers. So here the challenge is a much higher one as compared to infectious disease vaccines. There are established tumors and the vaccine has the task to shrink them. Another version of our cancer vaccine are highly individualized vaccines. Here we address the fact that every cancer patient has a unique tumor. And what we do is to identify the molecular fingerprint, the mutations of every cancer patient, and engineer an on-demand cancer vaccine for this patient within a couple of weeks in order to offer a tailored treatment. With both versions, we are already in advanced stages of clinical trials, including randomized clinical trials where we compare against standard of care cancer treatments.
That's great news. You managed to produce a COVID-19 vaccine, as everybody knows, in less than a year, a spectacular breakthrough. Shall we expect similar fast timescales for the developing of future vaccines? Now do you have a lot of the logistics, like you said, in place?
The COVID-19 vaccine development was in the pandemic setting, and that these were very special circumstances, which, for example, meant that also all involved parties, such as regulators, for example, prioritized all the steps which were included in the vaccine development, and worked on, for example, the dossiers for clinical trial approvals and for also authorizations. So I don't think that in a setting which is not a pandemic one with this urgency, we can replicate these fast timelines. However, we have learned many lessons from developing of this vaccine, such as regulatory pathways which are more accelerated, such as logistics and manufacturing shortcuts, which allow us to be faster in future. And I hope that can be indeed established in everyday practice of vaccine development and also therapeutics development.
Now, on other news, you have a book out with your husband, Ugur Şahin, who spoke at Wired Health last year. It was just released in Germany, if I'm not mistaken, this week. It will be available in the UK before Christmas. So it's a story about you, a story behind the vaccine, your journey as immune engineers as such. So I'm going to just say a quote from the book. We became founders out of desperation. We were physicians treating cancer patients, but too many times they had no treatment option left, and they had to tell the patient that there was nothing they can do anymore. Tell us a little bit more about that early motivation to launch the company.
Yes, as you just have quoted, we were cancer physicians, and we learned every day that the armamentarium which we have in terms of standards of care, in particular for advanced cancers, is a limited one. And on the other hand, being immunologists and researchers, we saw at the same time the potential of technology and of science to provide new ways of treating cancer patients. And we also saw that it took very long to bring those technologies to cancer patients, and they only reached them after a time where they were actually already outdated. And so the question was, how can we bridge this situation? How can we ensure that what is feasible technology and science-wise reaches cancer patients faster and can enrich the ways we can treat them? And when we looked for ways to do with this, we understood that the only way is to take things in own hands and ensure that those innovations we find at the lab bench are accelerated towards the patient's bedside by proper pharmaceutical development. And this was the reason why out of desperation, we became founders and developed our innovations towards treatments in our own company. That said, I think an important part of this is not to leave the academic space. So in principle, we are wanderers between these worlds of clinics, of academia, and of the private sector, in which we then develop our therapeutics.
Now, your first company wasn't BioNTech. In fact, you had to sell the first company because you couldn't afford a phase 3 trial. So what lessons did you take from that experience and then applied it later into BioNTech?
Our first company followed the typical biotech paradigm to translate scientific findings into early clinical stage product candidates, and then sell to pharma, either the product candidate or the entire company. And this business model is due to the relatively short investment cycles of risk capital and the volumes of funding which go into biotech companies, which altogether mean that the large and expensive phase 3 trials which are needed for getting the data you need for approval, it cannot be conducted in a biotech company. And this was a very important learning, and made us understand that we need to reinvent the biotech company model, including the business model. And this basically is the motivation for how we have set up BioNTech as a company which is both horizontally and vertically integrated, and set up in a way that we can also conduct, for example, in partnerships, phase 3 trials and bring products to approval, to authorization.
As a final question, I have to ask you about another revelation in the book, that Pfizer actually rejected your first offer to develop the vaccine. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, this first discussion was in January 2020. So at a time point where no one really believed that this new virus would become a pandemic. So our colleagues at Pfizer were not the only ones. In fact, this represented the position and the beliefs of the majority. And as soon as it became more visible that this would become a pandemic, also our Pfizer colleagues joined us in our effort to generate a vaccine.
Well, I'm very happy you managed to persuade them. Dr. Türeci, thank you so much for your time once again, and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.